Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to So You've Measured Youth's Social Emotional Skills. Now what? I'm Natasha from Making Sense International, and I'll be your sessions facilitator. Let me briefly introduce today's presenters. We're joined by Elizabeth Kim. Liz is a manager of measurement, evaluation, research, and learning at International Youth Foundation. She joined IYF in 2019 with a background as a former teacher and research specialist for an urban school district and is currently helping to lead the work in SEL measurement at IYF. That was kind of a tongue twister, a lot of acronyms there. uh, we also welcome Emma Catalfamo. Emma is a researcher on the Monitoring, Evaluation, and Research team at Education Development Center, Inc. Among other work, Emma provides support to EDC's youth team, for which she has led and supported the development and testing of teacher and youth skills assessments. Jerusalem Tessima is a MEAL and research specialist at Save the Children. She provides technical support to flagship multi-country youth employment program and leads Save the Children's efforts on the employment assessment tool. Now we want to find out a little bit about you as we begin the session and just find out who else is in the room with us. So we have a nifty poll that I'm going to launch here just to get your feedback. So you should now be able to just plug in and answer your two questions here. One is, what primary stakeholder role do you represent? And two, what is your current familiarity with the social emotional skills measurement tool? I'll give you a moment or two just to kind of plug and fill that out. Okay, well, it looks like the majority of you have completed the poll. And just to share some of those findings, let's see here, what do we have? So when it comes to the first question, what primary stakeholder role do you represent? 89% of you are implementers. 11% of you are youth. Number two, what is your current familiarity with the social emotional skills measurement tool? 44% of you are currently using a tool. 33% of you are looking for a tool. And 22% of you have no familiarity with the tool at all. So that tells us a little bit about who's in the room today. And just so if you want to take a look to see it on your screen there, I can share the results with you guys. You can kind of see who's in here with you. And so what I'm going to do now is turn it over to Liz so that we can go ahead and get started with the presentation. Enjoy yourselves.
Great. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having us. And before we get started, just to get us started, I'll give you a little bit about background and what we mean by social emotional skills. So there are multiple ways of defining social emotional skills. The concept is recognized by many names, including social emotional learning, life skills, soft skills, 21st century skills, and so forth, depending on the field and you're in. But for this presentation, we're referring to USAID's definition of social emotional skills as the broad set of skills, behaviors, and personal qualities that enable people to effectively navigate their environment, relate well with others, perform well, and achieve their goals. So this is a fairly broad definition that relays the essence of social emotional skills as the personal, professional, and relational characteristics that allow people to achieve their goals and realize positive outcomes. Related to the positive outcomes, indeed, there's been an increased interest in social emotional skills in the past few decades because it has been associated with positive life outcomes like academic achievement, employment, and civic responsibility. And perhaps for this reason has led to many workforce development programs for youth adopting SES curricula or training as a core programmatic component to improve the employability of youth. And along with the inclusion of SES curricular and training in workforce development programs, many tools have also been developed alongside that in order to be able to measure that change in SES. So, we've seen a big upsurge in SES curricula and training in workforce workforce development programs, as well as the tools to accompany measurement of those skills. And so in the next slide, we'll introduce just 3 tools that our respective organizations have developed to highlight the examples of SES measurement tools. So to begin with, EDC developed the Educator's Assessment of Learning Soft Skills Ability, or ILSA, in 2018 as a formative assessment administered by and graded by teachers and trainers. In this assessment, youth respond to 70 scenario-based multiple choice questions in 4 domains: communications, interpersonal skills, dependability, and problem solving or critical thinking. It's been tested with youth in Africa, including in Uganda, Rwanda, Tanzania, and Senegal. And the ILSA is one of several SES tools that EDC has developed, including the anchored BFI and WRN credential tests, which some of you may be familiar with already. Now, Save the Children developed the Employability Assessment tool in 2016 as a youth pre-post or retrospective self-reported survey. It has 24 items on positive self-concept, self-control, social skills, communication skills, higher order thinking skills, and job search skills. It's been used in a host of countries around the world, including Bangladesh, Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, Mexico, Italy, Ethiopia, Bolivia, and Uganda. And finally, International Youth Foundation also developed a life skills survey called the Life Skills Survey Tool, or the LIST, in 2019, designed as a youth pre-post or retrospective self-report survey. It contains 49 items on 4 domains: positive mindset, interpersonal skills, higher order thinking, and community mindset. It was pre-tested and validated with the population of US youth and pilot tested in Mexico and Tanzania to date. So as you can see from these 3 tools, there's a variety of SES domains organizations have focused on in terms of measurement, with some domains common across all 3 tools, like interpersonal skills and higher order thinking skills, as well as some distinguishing domains like dependability, job search skills, community mindset that might vary depending on the focus of the program. In addition, there are also different methodologies that are represented here for measuring this change, such as the scenario-based questions, ILSA, or the pre-post versus retrospective administration of the EA and the LIST as well. So if we go on to the next slide, in addition to the tools we highlighted in the previous slide as just examples of some SES tools that have been developed and tested in the field, there are also resources that others have developed that are particularly useful for those seeking an SES tool to implement into programs. Based on the tool we saw earlier, it looked like a good portion of our attendees today are in that process of maybe thinking about an SES tool to implement or develop on their own. And so we've just listed a couple of resources here to get you started thinking about what tools are out there already. So for example, Youth Powers Inventory, and you'll have these slides later, so you should be able to follow the link later. But Youth Powers Inventory lists soft skill tools. It has a list of all the different tools that are available, especially recognized in the international development space, along with some characteristics of how to administer, how it's been validated and tested. Similarly, RAND's Education Assessment Finder offers SES tools, especially familiar in the education space, so the K through 12 research area, have tools around that, as well as IME's Inventory that focuses on tools used in emergency contexts. So all of these inventories listed here kind of give you an idea of, or help you to search for different kinds of tools that might meet the needs of your project. And so just encourage you to check that out if you're in that stage and looking for a tool, in addition to the 3 that we just introduced. Finally, I'll just add also that Harvard Labs taxonomy project. If you go to their website, it dynamically maps various SES frameworks against each other. So not so much tools, but the different frameworks that organizations put forward, looking at the similarities and differences, the ways they've conceived of SES or SEL. And so you'll see in the image below an example of something drawn from the ETHO Labs website of comparing and mapping the similarities between Character Lab on the left and Castle on the right, SEL competency energies are different. So encourage you to check that out once you get these slides. And so in the next slide, we'll talk about kind of what is missing so far. So as you may have noticed by the tools highlighted by our organization, the 3 that we just talked about, as well as those that are listed and documented in the inventories that we introduced, as well as others that are out there, there's a great number of measurement tools that have already been developed, tested, and implemented in programs across the globe. So there's no shortage of measurement tools that are available, publicly available, or something you can purchase. But the missing link here that we see is that there's a lack of clarity on best practices for how to utilize the results of these tools. So once a survey or measurement tool is administered, who consumes the data? How is it shared? And how is it used to inform improvements? Oftentimes, SES measurement is used to report on a specific project metric, like the % of participants with an increase in soft skills. That might be your project metric, but it might not be used for more than that reporting. Furthermore, synergy among project stakeholders can also be lacking, and relationships among stakeholders underutilized. If you see the graphic below, we have multiple stakeholders that we've highlighted: employers, youth, researchers, and implementers, all who are integral to the success of a workforce development program. But these relationships might be underutilized, or because those connections might not exist. So, for example, implementers may administer an SES survey to youth, but the youth themselves might never see the results or know how they can leverage that in their job search. On the researcher side, they may survey the youth to validate a tool. They're creating a new tool as part of a pilot, but not really communicate the qualitative results of the tool to program implementers who might use that information to improve their programming. Or implementers may believe that the results of the SES tool represent that their youth are job ready at a certain level, but that signal is not interpreted in the same way by employers. And so you see that there's a little bit of confusion around what's the best way to use this information that we're getting, all this great data that we're getting from the SES tools that we're using. Who's seeing it? How are we using it? How is it being leveraged to benefit beneficiaries to the greatest degree? And so the lack of coordination or intentional purpose of the SES results can be a missed opportunity in ultimately providing more effective services for youth, which is why it's so important that we're having this conversation today. So we'll now take a look at how SES results have been used, now that we've talked about what's kind of missing, maybe something that needs to be bolstered, before we dive into a few case studies from our own organization. So in this slide, here's a list of different use cases for SES measurement results that we've brainstormed together. SES results have been used as a diagnostic tool or a developmental tool for youth to reflect on their current skills and how they could be improved. Results have also been used to inform the improvement of training curriculum and delivery. Results have also been used to as formative tools, similarly, for teachers and instructors to be able to fine-tune their instructional practices. They've also been utilized as certificates for demonstrating youth readiness, and also as a referral source for employers, signaling that a job candidate is they're apt and they're ready for that job. And finally, SES results have been used in research as well to evaluate the link between skills acquisition, soft skills or social emotional skills acquisition, and employment outcomes, and illuminate other important relationships to advance the research field, and ultimately build evidence to advocate for wider adoption of SES training within the education for other large systems. So these are just some ideas of how SES results have been or can be used. And now we'll take just a moment to dive into 3 examples of how SES results have been used in specific workforce development programs. To begin with, at IYF, one of our workforce development programs in Mexico involved 84 youth taking ACT's Tessera Workforce. And Tessera Workforce is a multimodal online assessment consisting of situational judgment tests, forced choice items, and self-report questions designed to measure skills essential to being a high-performing employee based on the Hexaco framework. So upon completing the assessment after the 3-month intervention, youth had the opportunity to review their score report, their assessment score report, and were invited to participate in a focus group. So we had a total of 38 participants from 4 cohorts. And in these focus groups, youth were asked to reflect on questions like, how accurate do you think this test was, highlighting your strengths and weaknesses? What job readiness skills do you think you've improved the most in, or the least in? How do you think the report you received could be useful or not, or helpful in your career? And how do you think the intervention helped you prepare to take this assessment? By doing so, youth were invited to think about the utility of the results in the context of their own personal and professional development. And from the focus groups, youth commented after reviewing their own results that it helped them on a professional level to identify their skills valued on the job. So, if there are certain skills that they know are prioritized or highly valued in the field that they're looking for, it would be a good time for them to self-reflect on that. And also to identify their strengths and weaknesses and to guide them as a reference point to continue developing certain skills. So if they scored relatively low on leadership, the leadership category, they might be more intentional about seeking mentorship or leadership opportunities to build that skill set. And so engaging youth in this way also helps to build critical thinking, because it encourages youth to not just view your score report and move on, but to assess whether you agree with the results, where nuances could exist in measurement, and create a targeted plan around self-improvement. Sometimes youth simply serve as vehicles through which SES results are obtained. So you're the one who takes the survey and we get that information from you, but they may never see the results of their SES gains or losses, or not be provided the adequate guidance to reflect on their progress or what the scores actually mean to them. So by utilizing the results of TESR in this way, we hope that it served as a developmental tool for youth to self-reflect and chart their path forward for self-improvement. And as an added benefit, the focus groups also illuminated areas for improvement in the tool itself, such as the feedback that we received that some scenarios were not as applicable for or relevant to the youth. They couldn't really picture themselves in those scenarios, so it was hard to respond to those questions, or that the response options needed to be expanded. So this is kind of an added bonus for us to receive feedback from the focus group that could be communicated back to the researcher or developer of the tool to spur revision. So this is one example of how an SES results of an SES tool have been utilized with youth. And now I'd like to hand it over to my colleague, Emma, to talk about their work with the ILSA tool.
Thanks, Liz. Sorry, I was just unmuting myself. So Liz talked a lot about different examples of the way that you can use soft skills measurement results and SES measurement results. And I do want to say that EDC has a lot of experience credentialing youth for their soft skills achievement and leveraging those credentials with employers through many of our projects, using our Work Ready Now credential test, like through the MyDev project in the Philippines and the HDAK project in Rwanda. But today I'm going to focus on our ILSA tool, which is a little bit different as it's a formative assessment to improve teachers' practice and youth skills. So as is mentioned in the overview of all of our different organizations' skills, EDC developed the educator's assessment of learner soft skills ability, or the ILSA tool. And this tool covers 4 standards of soft skills: communication, interpersonal skills, dependability, and problem solving and critical thinking. And within each of those 4 standards, there are several competencies that make them up. So these competencies include skills like oral and written communication, teamwork and group participation, taking personal responsibility for your work, following directions, and flexibility and adaptability, and making fact-based decisions. And the tool is intended to be used with youth with fairly strong literacy skills and some secondary education, since the questions are asked in a scenario-based format, which involves some detailed reading. So we piloted this tool with youth in Uganda, Rwanda, Senegal, and Tanzania, with around 500 youth in each country. And the result of the tool's reliability were promising, especially showing that the tool was not biased by gender and that it was reliable both at the overall level as well as by each standard, meaning that teachers and trainers could use this tool reliably to assess student skills progressively rather than all at once. So they could administer this just to assess students' progress on communication skills, for example, or they could use it to test all 4 standards that the tool covers. So notably, this tool wasn't used as part of any ongoing program intervention. So this case study is a little bit more about the conceptualization of its intended use, which is as a formative assessment, like I said. Unlike summative assessments, which evaluate student learning, often after learning is completed, to compare their learning against a standard or benchmark, formative assessments help identify strengths and weaknesses with the intention to target areas that need work. So the primary focus of the formative assessment is to identify areas among the students or whoever's taking it that need improvement. And so then you can progress students toward completing their learning more effectively. So the tool was developed on our part with the end user in mind, and those end users are teachers and trainers. We piloted this tool both in formal education settings and informal education settings, and it was reliable in both of those settings. So to facilitate this, we developed a corresponding user guide for teachers and trainers, which provides instructions on how to administer the assessment and mark it using a detailed answer key. And the guide walks teachers and trainers through how to mark the assessment both at the standard level and at the level of the full test. And the answer key links each question to the competencies within each standard so that teachers or trainers can see exactly what sorts of things students may be struggling with or performing particularly well in. And the guide encourages teachers and trainers to identify their own thresholds for success for their students and for themselves by asking themselves what goals they've set for both their students and themselves as a teacher or trainer. And by identifying these success metrics, teachers can determine which students are meeting their expectations, which students are exceeding their expectations, and which students are approaching or are far below their expectations for each skills standard. And based on these categorizations, teachers and trainers can develop an action plan to determine how they'll support the students who are struggling and how they can utilize the stronger students to help other students improve in sort of a peer support process. And teachers and trainers are encouraged to prioritize the standards that they'll focus continuous effort on and to use strategies or activities in their own curriculum to do so. The scoring method and action plan really allows teachers and trainers to use the students' results to change their methods and target instruction where students seem to need it most, which is the goal of the formative assessment. Critical to the development of this tool was stakeholder involvement on the part of education ministries in the pilot countries, with the goal that education systems in these contexts and in the context in which we work will introduce and adopt formative assessment more systematically within their schools and training centers. We've been working to introduce this tool and concept to other implementers to encourage use of formative assessment and to partner in piloting the tool with teachers and trainers and to pilot this user guide. And ultimately, the tool will be open source. So far, it's been met with enthusiasm, and our next steps will be to pilot this user guide. And like I said, like you can see here on the slide, it's really contributing to this ultimate goal of the project through which this tool was developed, which is to promote an environment in which teachers and students both view assessment not only as a summative tool, but also as a formative tool to communicate progress and allow teachers to improve instruction and their students' progress, which is kind of aligns with what Liz was saying about making sure that the youth who are completing these assessments do get their results and know what they can do with them. So next, Jerusalem will showcase a study from Save the Children that explores the relationship between skills attainment and employment outcomes.
Thank you, Emma. So as Emma described, I will go over an assessment that Save the Children conducted to look at the relationship between life skills and employment outcomes. As Liz mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, Save the Children has developed the employability assessment tool back in 2016, and we have been using it in over 10 countries for the last 4 or so years. One important aspect of this work is to have data-driven questions and conduct research that will inform the work that we're doing. Our theory of change for our multi-country youth employment program states that youth will receive life skills training along with either vocational or entrepreneurship training, and this will result in youth being employed or starting their business. We're providing training in life skills because we know and we think that it is linked directly to better employment outcomes. We at Save the Children wanted to put this to the test and have been conducting various research to answer this question. In 2019, we conducted a research that examined the relationship between life skills acquisition and employment outcomes for youth in Mexico, Indonesia, and Bangladesh. We had over 900 youth across the 3 countries included in our sample size, and we looked at data from our employability assessment tool, along with program baseline and endline data to track change in employment over time. After our analysis, we found that youth in Bangladesh with higher life skills scores at post-test were more likely to be employed compared to youth with lower life skills scores. This tells us that an increase in socio-emotional skills did correlate to higher employment rate for our youth in Bangladesh. However, we did not find the same results for youth in Indonesia and Mexico, which begs the question why. There is literature that does suggest that perhaps an increase in life skills is not only associated with youth gaining employment, but that there are other employment outcomes that will help youth with job retention or help them excel in their career and gain higher salaries or advance in their career faster than their peers. One reason for this is that youth might not have the opportunity during the interviewing process to showcase their life skills, but that this advantage will come into play and help them once they are employed. So what are you finding in your organizations in doing similar research, if you are doing similar research? Where in the employment journey does life skills support youth? Are we conducting research and evaluations to collect this evidence? Do we have a robust NEAL system that will allow for such evidence gathering? For example, are we collecting data from youth 1 to 3 years post-program to see the long-term effects of improved life skills on their employment outcomes? These are just some questions for us to reflect on and to think about what we expect in providing life skills training for youth and how we're using these results and linking them to employment outcomes. So with that, we are now going to transition into our group activity. So Liz, myself, and Emma have provided some background information and examples on how our institutions have used SES results, and now we want to hear from you. We will use Padlet for this activity, and we will ask that we think about 4 specific stakeholders and how they can best utilize results of SES measures. So the 4 stakeholders are implementers, employers, youth, and researchers. For each of these stakeholders, we have 2 specific questions. For implementers, how can implementers use findings to inform or better inform program design, implementation, and program improvements? For employers, how can employers use these results to inform their hiring practices? For youth, how can youth use these results to understand and very importantly, market their skill sets when they are looking for a job. And lastly, for researchers, how can researchers leverage these results and to refine tools and conduct more targeted research? And for all stakeholders, we do want you to think about what assumptions, resources, risks and challenges, and gender consideration do we need to make when we're developing plans to maximize data utilization. So with that, we are going to now transition to the Padlet. But before I hand it over, just a couple of reminders. We will give all of you 5 minutes to read through the questions and start writing responses. And then we will spend 5 minutes on each stakeholder to go through your ideas and comments. So we'll spend about 5 minutes for each stakeholder. So with that, I'm gonna hand it over to Emma to do a mini tutorial on how to use Padlet and give us some instructions.
Thanks, Jerusalem. So before I put the Padlet link into the chat, I'm just gonna share my screen so that I can, like Jerusalem said, do a little bit of a tutorial in how to use Padlet. So just give me 1 second. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see the Padlet on my screen. So as you can see here, we have some instructions on the left-hand side, and then we have columns for each of our 4 stakeholders: implementers, employers, youth, and researchers. So anyone is able to add sticky notes to this web page once you've opened it on your own computer. And to do so, all you have to do is just click the plus button. And what we would hope you do, if you like, if you're comfortable with it, is include your name or your organization in the title of your sticky note. So I'll just put, for example, Emma EDC. And then what we would ask is that in the body of the sticky note, you put your idea for what for the answers to these questions for each stakeholder. So for example, for implementers, I might say that they can use findings, that they can use findings to market youth skills to future employers and private sector partners. Once I've written that, I can click out to finalize it and move it just by simply clicking and dragging it to the question that I'd like to answer. And if you want to delete your comment, all you have to do is hover over the comment and click on the trash can icon. So like Jerusalem said, we'll take 5 minutes just for people to add their ideas and reflect on this a little bit, and then we'll review them together in what we hope will be a lively discussion. And we are going to play some background music while we're doing this, but if it's too loud, just let us know in the chat and we can turn it off if it's bothering you. But we just thought it would be a nice background. So I've just gone ahead and popped the link in the chat. So if you can open that up on your screens and get started. And if you're having questions with the Padlet or issues, go ahead and put them in the chat and we can answer them. All right. Okay, so I think there's still some people wrapping up their comments, but wow, we got some really great interaction from all of you. We really appreciate it. So I do have the Padlet open on my screen still, I believe. So if you'd like to follow along there or on your own Padlet, that's just fine. But really what we're hoping to do now is sort of get some conversation going. You know, people have had their thoughts and hopefully some folks can expand on their ideas. And we can start maybe from the implementer point of view. We know that a lot of the poll at the beginning showed that a lot of the participants in today's session are actually implementers. So, you know, we have a lot of comments about how implementers can use findings of SES measurement tools to inform program design, implementation, and improvement. So I don't know if anybody would like to, you know, volunteer to share something. You could raise your hand or write in the chat. And if not, maybe I might just call out on a couple of people. But just in case anyone's kind of itching to share their idea, feel free to let us know and we can unmute you and have your commentary. All right, so no immediate takers, but maybe I can start by sharing what I mentioned, and maybe I'll just call on some other participants if they'd like to share, no pressure. But I had mentioned that, we can use this to market youth skills to future employers and private sector partners. So as I mentioned at the beginning of my case study, that EDC has some experience with this in credentialing youth and communicating those credentials to employers to help kind of market their youth skills for future employment opportunities. So maybe I'll just see if anyone else would like to add. I see that Devora from EDC, actually, welcome Devora, mentioned that SES results can help improve materials being developed. Devora, I don't know if you'd like to comment on it or if you'd like to just leave it there. But we have some other comments from Liz as well, and from Enga as well. Just take a look at the chat. So if anybody would like to comment on their, kind of expand on their comments, feel free to do so.
Hi, Emma. This is Monica from SAVE. So I think I had a similar comment to Devora's, where it's really about improving not only our materials, but the content itself of our trainings and interventions, maybe the modalities, just understanding if we see trends that youth are not understanding a certain skill or are not improving a certain skill, it can help us guide maybe an exploration of how we could improve our contents, our materials, and our training. So I think it was in the same line of thought as Devora.
Thank you, Monica. That's great. I see that Dave has his hand raised. Dave Hall.
Hi, Emma. Yeah, so I kind of wanted to go a bit more deeply into that. I absolutely get the tool and that we can assess the students. But as you know, we're involved in creating curriculum, life skills curriculum and such like. And what I can't quite do is bridge that gap as to which should come first, because really I think they should be designed in parallel. We're designing the curriculum. It would be great to assess in this way at the end. But how much work has been done to kind of link those two things together? And maybe a stupid question, but I can't quite, it's not what we're doing, and yet I'd kind of like to do it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely, Dave. Thanks. And no stupid questions here, so don't worry about that.
Loads, that.
I'd invite anyone, if they'd like to comment on that, to jump in and unmute themselves and give their thoughts. I think from my end, Dave, I agree that, when developing these skills tools in the context of our curriculum, I think one of the most important things is to make sure that whatever tools you're using are very much contextualized to the curriculum that you're using. So, if you have a tool that you use across several of your projects, I think a very important piece is to make sure that it's actually aligned with whatever contextualization has been done for your own curriculum, for your specific project and context, because it can be really hard to accurately measure youth skills attainment otherwise, if it's not actually tied to what they're learning directly. And so I think that's something important to keep in mind. And then, like you're saying, have that kind of feedback into the curriculum, so to speak, and say, if, like Monica was saying, if students don't seem to be achieving the results that we thought they might, then maybe we need to reevaluate the curriculum a bit. Does anyone else want to add and think about that a little bit?
Emma, let me just jump in again. It's Dave again, yeah? That was a great answer. That was exactly what I was looking for, was how to feed back results. Like you say, if you've got a cohort of students who are weak in one area, I assume I can identify closely enough so I can improve the curriculum. But like I say, it would be kind of nice if we could develop them in parallel at the beginning. It might save us an iteration or two. anyway, I'll shut up and let somebody else talk. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll jump in really quickly. I think somewhat related to Dave, what you were talking about. I had written something around like booster sessions. So I think there's like degrees of how much change you've done, right? Like if you have a cohort that's particularly weak, or had like low results on one domain based on your survey tool or whatever tool you're using, that might be a way for the instructor or the trainer to think, oh, maybe we need to just like add in a couple of more sessions on this topic to help young people get to the level of their other peers. But that might not necessitate an entire like curriculum shift for like the flagship program that you're using. So I think it also depends on the context, like we're saying, Emma was saying earlier, like who needs that change, how much of a change, or how drastic of a change could it be kind of supplemented with kind of booster sessions that are targeted towards certain areas, or does it warrant kind of going back to the theory behind theory and conceptualization of which SES skills are important and which can be influenced by these programs, to make kind of more institutional shifts in that area as well. So I guess just to add that we might think about the degree of which changes might need to be made to the curriculum. But yeah, definitely agree with you that at least for our programming, a lot of it has been iterative. Like we'll create a tool, get some information, and might inform some curricular advancements or enhancements that we want to make. So if we can do it early on, that's even better. But a lot of the times, that's unfortunately not the case with timing.
Great. Does anyone else have any kind of burning thoughts that they want to share on the implementer side? If not, we can shift over to employer, but this kind of open discussion, I think, is really useful. All right. And if you do throughout the session want to kind of go back on thoughts, obviously it doesn't have to be too organized. So we can shift over to the employer side now, which I think has gotten a lot of commentary. As you can see, I'm scrolling up and down, both how employers can use results and also thinking about assumptions and resources needed in thinking of this. So I see, for example, Engels from EDC has mentioned that you can consider social emotional skills components in hiring decisions and refining competency profiles of each type of work. So really getting the employer involved in understanding what skills your youth are, having employers be very involved in understanding the skills that youth are developing as part of their training and making sure that they're considering those in hiring. And Susan mentioned that employers can use results to develop professional development training for their employees. I think that's also very interesting. Shirin said that employers can use results to diagnose skill development areas, so sort of similar to Susan in thinking about professional development. And Engao said that employers can craft their selection process using interview questions with social and emotional skills. So these are all really good thoughts. I don't know if anyone who shared, or even people who didn't share on the employer side, would like to expand a bit and let us know what they're thinking in more detail. Okay, nobody yet. But one thing I kind of wanted to comment on, and this is a comment from Dave again about matching results to the attributes required by employers. And also a lot of these comments we're talking about, we're kind of thinking from the perspective of employers really understanding the skills that youth are developing and kind of being involved in that process. And actually at EDC, as part of one of our projects, we developed an interesting tool called the Employee Quality Index that was looking at employer satisfaction, but actually trying to create a more standardized index that was a little bit less subjective and trying to kind of see from a large swath of employers who would hire youth as entry-level employees to get a sense from them on what sorts of skills they were really prioritizing. And that can kind of feed back into implementer side to sort of see what are employers interested in, and are we teaching to that, and are they interested in the skills that we're already promoting. And we were pleased to find that in this sample of employers that came from Southeast Asia, a lot of them really prioritize those soft social and emotional skills, things like patience, teamwork, timeliness, honesty, things like that, over some technical skills for entry-level employees. So just a thought, I don't know if anyone has explored stuff like that in their work as well.
Emma, yes, hi, this is Sharon from IYF. I think one of the things that we have thought about and heard from some of our partners as we've worked to explore and even develop some assessments is really kind of the importance of when an employer is thinking about incorporating an assessment into their hiring process, just really the need for that assessment to have a long tail of data and to have a lot of transparency around the algorithm and maybe even the norming sample for the scores that are going to be reported, because depending on the legal framework of the country where the employer is, not only are there ethical concerns potentially about scoring someone on data that might be somewhat biased, or an algorithm that might be biased, but that could also have some legal implications for the employer. And so this is something that we've thought a bit about, and are therefore quite cautious before recommending wholeheartedly that a hiring decision or a high stakes decision be made based on this data. One maybe as a data point, but not necessarily exclusively.
That is a really good point, Shireen. I think that that's one thing we do think about at Save the Children as well, and thinking about the assessment tool and how it should and shouldn't be used. And I like that term of high stake, because if youth are being given or not given a job based on the results of an assessment, that is a big, that's a big implication. And we know during the tool development and adaptation process that, sometimes because of how the questions are worded, maybe males or females might score higher or lower than their peers, or there could be other groups that disproportionately score higher or lower. So as we are developing, using, testing that tool, we do have an ethical obligation to make sure that it's being used appropriately. So I think your point is a really important one. I'm wondering if others have other reflections on that responsibility as well.
This is Monica again. I think sometimes also what we need to understand is that language, right, might be a barrier for specific populations. For example, when we're using the tool with migrant populations, like we're doing in our program in Italy, we're working with migrant youth. It's not necessarily that our youth are not acquiring the skills, but that they might not understand the questions of the surveys. So while I know this is part of the adaptation process, that's why I feel that I agree with what has been said previously, that we shouldn't use these tools to make any high stake decisions, because they might not be reflective of the youth actually, their skills. But things like language barriers can actually affect their ability to answer or understanding the question. So I would personally advise not to use them for this kind of work, I think, or for this kind of application, like it's been said, but rather more on the signaling side, like other people have commented, and give youth tools to promote themselves better and to be able to speak about their skills, but not necessarily as an evaluation tool for an employer.
Thanks, Monica. That's a great point. Dave, go ahead. I can see you're unmuted.
Yeah, sorry, Emma. Yeah, can I just jump in? So that was my thought as well. Was that if you're using this as a kind of selection tool, there's a whole lot of dangers in it, because people could come across different ways in different times and with different mechanisms. Yeah, and so I see it kind of primarily as a diagnostic tool, how to improve youth, how to improve a cohort, how to improve individuals. And my guess is that's more how it's intended rather than a selection tool. It might help me make a choice between the two best candidates, but still only used with some common sense. But I do see it much more useful, when like we're dealing with large numbers of youth and large cohorts, and it would be very useful for diagnostics, as I said earlier, how to improve our curriculum, whether we're missing anything, and whether we're really achieving what we're setting out to do. So that would be my guess. Much better used like that, yeah.
Great.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. And just one extra comment on that is, I think a way that we can think about this, and I think EDC is exploring this a little bit, is to also combine these skills assessments with demonstration opportunities for youth to both demonstrate their skills as well as, check off answers on an assessment. And there are these different measures, like as Liz mentioned before, of having focus groups where youth can kind of discuss their skills and kind of back them up a little bit. But these are great points. Thanks.
Great. And I think that's actually a great segue to talk about some of the ideas that you all had for youth. So most of them we had mentioned, but just to summarize what's on here, we want youth to use the results of the tool to create some or use it as a reflection tool to know where they are and what types of skills that they want to improve. We want youth to use the results to educate themselves on the importance of, of this, and it's not just technical skills that can help them in their journey. And that this could be used as a signaling to signal their skills and market them with employers. So maybe since we've been talking about signaling, and that is an important piece and links to the employer, I'm wondering if there are any organizations here who have done that, who've helped youth better signal their results until they are able to market themselves effectively in the job market, either stuff that you've done or you've seen in studies or are just aware of. And you can just unmute yourself and talk.
Hi, everyone. This is Anne from EDC. I think to your question, Jerusalem, I think we have done some support for youth in signaling, but I don't know that it's really come from assessments, actually. I think that's mostly come from the coursework and the training that the youth are doing. So that's a really interesting area for us to think about, is how can we use these assessment results for youth to really understand them and take that forward. And I made a comment below about the importance of making sure that assessment results are explained very clearly to youth, so that they can then take that information forward themselves. Because I think that's a gap we sometimes see, that because we understand the assessment results, we assume that it's clear to everyone, and it may not always be. So that's something that we really have to think about, is making sure that youth can understand and use their assessment results however they see fit to improve their lives.
And can I complement what Anne is saying?
Yeah.
My comment was along the lines, but also for us to provide resources or links to how can they keep improving their skills. If we are going to give them their assessments back and we want them to be reflective to the areas of improvement, we should also provide either connections or materials or resources that they can use to keep improving their skills.
Great. That's a great point, both Monica and Anne. Do you guys have examples of effective ways where we're explaining results to youth or providing additional resources on how they can improve if that's their goal.
Yeah, this is Anne again. I would say that in a lot of our programming at EDC, the support comes from kind of ongoing coaching or mentoring for youth. And again, I don't really believe that we've directly used assessment results for a lot of that. And that's an area that we're really wanting to move into. And what happens is a trainer will identify areas for further support or a coach will identify them and then work with the youth on those. So I think that there definitely needs to be further support provided, whether it's resources or, sort of written resources or other resources or kind of one-on-one coaching. That's a critical piece. Otherwise, I think youth are left feeling a little bit hung out to dry, like here are your results and good luck, as opposed to here are your results and here are how we can help you improve in some of these areas. And that's, I think, really the whole point of all of this, is to really help them continue to grow.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I think what you said, Anna, about like the one-on-one or the kind of more specialized mentoring or support that youth could receive is really important, because as we've talked about earlier, like the results may be really difficult to interpret. Like why was my score so low on this area? Maybe they don't agree with what the score report is telling them, or again, like cultural or gender factors might play into it, where research has shown that a lot of Asian students will kind of underestimate their abilities, whereas some other populations might overestimate their abilities. And so that could also be very confusing for youth. It's like, wait, why did I only score like a 1 or a 2 on this, where I think I have more to offer? And so because every assessment is different and every student has their own kind of background as well, I think it is really important that we consider all of that when we provide that targeted support for youth to be able to market themselves more effectively.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Liz. And it ties really nicely to some of the questions that were suggested under the researcher category as well. One comment from Dave was, how much work are we doing to evaluate these tools and potentially correcting or, looking at errors and not being able to generalize. So as Liz was showing examples of different tools at the beginning of the presentation, we know that there's an abundance of tools developed from, lots of organizations that are being used globally. So to your point, Dave, yes, not every tool is the same, but also, one tool that works for one country or one program does not mean that it should be used or is appropriate to be used for another context. So how much work we are putting in to evaluate these tools and selecting which ones work best for our programs is very, very key, and something I think we all have to continuously do. Yeah, so I don't know if there are any comments on that one. I know I'm running out of time, but I think that one, and then on the employment outcome question, I'm curious to hear as well. Yes, I agree that we shouldn't just look at, whether youth have a job or not. How are we looking at quality of work and employment outcomes over time as well? So if there's any reflections on on either one of those.
This is Linda Fogarty from IYF, and I have a random comment unrelated to those two. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Go for it.
Thanks. But I was wondering to what extent, and I'm thinking about these scores at a more of a cohort than an individual level, but to what extent can we kind of use group scores to facilitate a conversation between our stakeholders in the private sector and our stakeholders at vocational training schools, for example, so that the vocational training schools that might be implementing life skills trainings can use the data with the employers that are, either providing internships or hiring students, to provide some feedback to the curriculum to get, to fine tune it so that it's really meeting the employer's needs more. Again, not at the individual level, but at the group level, cohort level. And we're not doing that, but I think it could be done.
Yes, that's a really good idea. Has anyone in this group done that? Or wants to comment on, I guess, okay, we only have 5 minutes, sorry. So maybe just one comment on the researcher or responding to Linda's comment, and then we will move to our closing session.
Hi, this is Anne from EDC again. I think that's a great point, Linda. The cohort level results and aligning TVET and other training with private sector needs. I think we often do that in some ways when we're doing the beginning of project work, but I don't, like setting up curriculum and training and kind of setting up systems for apprenticeships and internships. But I think that there's something really key there about thinking of it as a longer and a more continuous feedback loop, where we can then look at the results of the assessment by cohort and continually have those conversations between the TVETs and or the training institutions, whatever they may be, and the private sector. I think that's sometimes a gap. And so I really, really like that point. And I think that's a way that we could also use our results to improve programming and improve employment outcomes overall for youth. So I'm glad you said that. It's given me something to chew on for the rest of the day.
Great. Well, that's a good ending note that we got something to chew on. So if we just go to the closing slide. Flip back. We only have a few minutes. We just we hope that you've gained or taken away some ideas for more effectively using the results of SES tools for the short time we had. And as we come to close, we just like to pause and ask that you reflect on the following 2 questions. One, how will you maximize the use of results from your SES tool if you're using one already and thinking about how using results differently? And also, how would you use these new ideas to plan or design an SES study or tool? In the future, if you're thinking of developing a tool or thinking of developing a study or program, how would these ideas come? And this is meant to be a kind of reflective questions on your own privately. Don't feel the need to share, but if you would like to share kind of something, a takeaway or 2 that you've been thinking about, feel free to drop it in the chat for the rest of the participants, but otherwise feel free to just have this as a self-reflection activity. And just because of time, I think we'll just close there. I thank you all for joining us for the session. We hope it was informative and spark some new ideas for you on how you can amplify the work you're already doing with social skills development with youth. And I think Natasha has just a few closing comments, but otherwise, thank you so much.
Thank you all. I just want to thank again Liz, Emma, and Jerusalem for sharing their wisdom today. It was a wonderful presentation. Please know that their presentation will be shared on the summit page and through the YEO newsletter in the coming weeks for those who want to revisit it. Otherwise, thank you for joining us and enjoy your day.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.